morning, America. What if I can tell you what's going to happen to you in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a year? What if I can predict what's going to happen to you in 10 years? Would you pay attention? Of course you would. We're all curious individuals. We would like to know what's going to happen before it happens. Now, what if I tell you that I can say with a high degree of certainty what will happen to the country if things continue to go the way that it's going? No, I'm not a psychic. I rely on history to draw conclusion to what the future holds. The discussion today is in regards to the similarities between Adolf Hitler, Chancellor of Germany in 1933, and Donald Trump, President of the United States. So what is the common denominator in this story? George Santayana said that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to relive it. In a twist, I said that those who ignore the past will be forced to relive it. In other words, I can say with a high degree of certainty that unless we draw from the past, unless we learn from the past, we will repeat history. Now, there are certain aspects of history nobody would mind repeating it. But the history of Germany in 1993, nobody would like to repeat that. Now, that's the reason I chose to discuss for the past few weeks in regards to the similarities between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. Now, I could have ignored the whole thing altogether, just like a number of Trump supporters think it is a waste of time to even talk about that. Some of them offer their own rationale as to why this comparison is useless and absolutely unnecessary. I would like to point out once again that those who want to ignore the past will be forced to relive it. Now, if it were to be for the Trump supporters, ignoring the past will be just fine with them. But there is also an aspect of life that we cannot rely on the comments or on the rationale of Trump supporters to simply live our life. Number one, we know that ignorance is actually very detrimental to life, very detrimental to society. One of the most renowned, intelligent philosopher who lived quite some time before modern time, that is Confucius, who lived in 479 BC, say that knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. And I repeated a number of times that ignorance is the biggest threat to democracy. So in other words, we cannot just live life the way that Trump supporters believe it should be, and as a few of them pointed out, just leave the man alone to do his job and let anything and everything happen as if those things would just correct themselves. History has taught us that unless there is a sector of society, a sector of the world who sees the danger coming and work towards either preventing it from happening or fight the danger, then the world will find itself in a predicament that could have been avoided had simply everybody paid attention or worked towards preventing that danger from happening. Now, does that mean that Trump is a danger? Well, let's find out. In fact, that's the whole point of the documentary debating similarities between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. Now, I have been talking about that for the past few weeks, and in fact today it's part 6 of the documentary, The Similarities Between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. I have to point out right off the bat that a number of people seem to be under the impression that Adolf Hitler was a dictator, and that's also one of the reasons that they quote to prevent the very discussion of the documentary, that Adolf Hitler was a dictator and there is no reason to compare Donald Trump with Adolf Hitler. Now, here is my counter argument. Adolf Hitler did not start out as a dictator. In fact, Adolf Hitler, if you've been following this documentary, you would know that Adolf Hitler was appointed just like any other chancellor of Germany. Well, today they have election to put the chancellor of Germany. But during Adolf Hitler time, there was president, and the president would appoint a chancellor just like the president of the United States appoints member of his cabinet. So Adolf Hitler was legitimately appointed as the chancellor of Germany. So for those who believe that Adolf Hitler was just a dictator and that should put an end to the series discussing the similarities between Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump. And it is important to know that not only that Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, but also Adolf Hitler became one of the most popular chancellor of his time. He was a very popular individual. Now, let's go back to the discussion of Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. A quick recap that we talk about Adolf Hitler from the time that he was a child, from the time he was a baby to the time he was appointed Chancellor of Germany. Number one, Adolf Hitler was born in a family of 6. 3 of his siblings died in very early age, and actually while one was died as a short time after birth, and a couple of them died as toddlers. And Adolf Hitler remained one of 3 of the siblings that happened to live a life of misery. And we explained in previous episode of the documentary that at some point Adolf Hitler was homeless, living on the street, begging or scraping for food based on the fact that he could draw very quickly and sell those drawings for a few pennies so that he could survive. And very early on, at the age of 19, he joined the armed forces. And right after joining the armed forces, he was forced to actually go to war, World War I. And after World War I, he came back. He was decorated for his service. And Germany lost World War I, and Germany was forced to pay what they call war reparation fee. That was at that time, there was no United Nations. There was a similar body, world body called League of Nations that would be later on transformed into United Nations. But nevertheless, League of Nations, after Germany lost the war, slap Germany with a fee called war reparation fee. And Germany was paying because Germany didn't have any choice to into the matter. In the Treaty of Versailles that was agreed upon, Germany was paying to the neighboring countries that Germany conquered during World War I, and because of the damages that they caused. So now they've found themselves, Germany found itself in the predicament of having to pay to make to do repairs to all those countries that they damaged during the war. Now, Hitler wasn't really very fond of the arrangement, but there is a gentleman that we introduced last time by the name of Hindenburg. Now, Hindenburg happened to have been the general that was called to help Germany fight World War I when he was already retired, but at that time, Germany was being ruled by a king. But during the war, because of the fact that Hindenburg was known as a strategist, so they asked him to come out of retirement to help fight the war. In fact, he was very good at strategizing for war. That's why at the point that he realized that Germany was losing the war, instead of sacrificing all the soldiers, he decided to raise the white flag and admitted defeat and save the soldiers in the process. Later on, Hindenburg said that we can fight that war another time, because if all the soldiers died, if all the soldiers perish in that war, so the chances of Germany coming back and fighting again would be impossible. At the very least, it would take a very long time. So from the very early on, Hindenburg made the determination that the best course of action was to claim a defeat and accepted whatever fate that the League of Nations put on Germany. Now, after that defeat, after Adolf Hitler was decorated as a soldier for his performance during the war, he came back, and he wasn't really very happy with what Germany did, meaning he would have preferred to die fighting for Germany than for the country to have accepted defeat and now having to pay war reparation fee to the League of Nations. So Mr. Hitler was very unhappy about the situation. Now, adding to that, Hitler was named the leader of the German Worker Party. Now, the German Worker Party would later on become what we know of as the Nazi Party. But at that time, the German Workers' Party was simply a political party that it was pretty marginal in terms of influence. In fact, even when it was known as NSDAP, it's another abbreviation for the Nazi Party, it didn't have much influence in Germany. According to history, in 1992, beginning of 1993, there were only 3 members of that party that belonged to the Reichstag group. Reichstag, actually, it's the equivalent of Congress in the United States, and there is the Reichsrat, which is the equivalent of the Senate in the United States. So the Reichstag, which is the party with more members, so the Nazi Party had only 3 members in that body of the government. But nevertheless, Adolf Hitler was named the leader of the party. Now, because of his position, or at least it took advantage of the position to advance an agenda that he had, pretty much captured that particular agenda since he was on the street before he joined the armed forces, and when he had to actually be begging for food, when he actually had to scrape for food, that particular agenda, or at least I should say that particular aspect of his life shaped the man that Adolf Hitler would later become. So he used to watch very wealthy individual, rich people laughing on the street, strolling, going to the movies, going to the theater, and actually living a plushy life. And most of the time, while he was on the street scraping for food, begging for money, he could see from the street through windows that those wealthy individuals left their windows open, their curtain pulled, and he could see them inside their mansion, laughing, dancing, music, food, and so on, and he couldn't do anything about that. And ironically, those people that were so wealthy in Germany were Jews. And I did mention in the past expose that there were even rumors that his mother actually served as a maid to one of the Jewish family. So although Adolf Hitler never confirmed that was the case, and a historian even mentioned that it was a tidbit of anecdote that history could not confirm, but nevertheless it lingered to a point that must have outrage Adolf Hitler, that they kept talking about his mother being a maid at one of the Jewish families. Now, when he became, when Germany was slapped with a war reparation fee, what even angered him the most was the fact that those wealthy individuals were spared. In other words, they didn't have to pay any fee. They didn't even have to help Germany pay the fee. So Adolf Hitler became even more enraged by the fact that he spent his life scraping for food on the street, watching those Jews having a plushy life, and now he's Germany as a country are fighting, or at least trying to find a way to pay fees that were slapped on the country from the League of Nations, and yet the wealthy individual would not even chip in. So, and I mentioned that part of the story for a very specific reason, because every time that Adolf Hitler is talked about, and we always talked about the fact that he had killed 6 million Jews. And the question that I always ask, where did that come from? Why did he have to kill 6 million Jews? So the story is not without precedent. It's because, of course, from his childhood now to becoming a leader of the Nazi Party, he had shaped, his opinion has shaped, seeing all those things happening right under his eyes, and of course he has developed anger, hatred toward that very group. Now, this is not to say that is okay, but it's to explain as to there was a reason why he had such hatred for that specific group. So it's not out of the blue. It's that he just became a monster and then start killing Jews. Now, when he became leader of the Nazi Party, now the Nazi Party was not that influential, but nevertheless, last time we left you, we left you at the point where Hindenburg, who was a general in the armed forces of Germany, at 66 years old, he was already retired, but he was called in to help Germany with the war, World War I. So he came back, he helped, and of course, after the war, he saved a few soldiers, and then after the war, he managed to go through the Treaty of Versailles, and the treaty was signed, and he went back into retirement. But something else came up at 84 years old. So he is back in retirement. So at 66, he was retired. For World War I, they called him and they said, we need you because we have problems. So of course, as a patriot of Germany, he came back, he helped, and he put Germany at a point where the war was over. Then he went back to retirement. Now, at 84 years old, they call him again, but this time it wasn't for war. This time they call him because they had a different problem. The problem that they had, that was in 1932. In 1932, what was happening in Germany is the fact that a gentleman by the name of Adolf Hitler happened to have in 1929. Now, 1929 is a few years after the war has ended. The war, World War I, started in 1914 and ended in 1919. Now, in 1921, of course, Adolf Hitler was beginning to become someone who was looked at as someone who can become a leader of a party, because he was very vocal. He was always talking about what was destroying the country. It's kind of as we mentioned last time, it's kind of a parallel to what really we observed during the the primary election, when Trump jumped into the political arena, where he was talking about all the bad things that were happening to the country and how he posed as a hero that is going to change all that. So if you recall that very moment when Trump was talking about all the people that were coming into the country and making bad things happen, and all the bad trade that the United States has had, and pretty much putting a grim picture as to what the country looks like, and offering himself as a solution for those problems. Remember that? Exactly the same approach used by Adolf Hitler. So after the war, Germany found itself in a predicament where money that was coming into the country was being spent in paying war reparation fees. So Germany was having an extremely bad time. And what did Adolf Hitler do? Being the leader of the party that would later on become the Nazi party, so he was rallying people who felt the same way, usually very young people that felt that Germany shouldn't have to go through that. So in 1923, Adolf Hitler went into a rampage of trying to overthrow the government. He failed. He went to jail. So while in jail, Adolf Hitler wrote an autobiography called Mein Kampf, which is a German word simply meaning my struggle. So in that autobiography, he of course talked about all the bad things that has happened in his life on the street, his life with his parents, his life in the armed forces. In fact, he actually depicted what we call a very sad life of someone who really didn't have a life, didn't have anything to lose. So he went to jail, and he spent only 1 year in jail. So when he came out of jail in 1924, now you would expect someone who went to jail trying to overthrow the government, most likely you would expect that person to spend years and years, decades and decades in jail. But he only spent 1 year in jail. So when he came, when he was released in 1924, Now, instead of disappearing from the political scene, in fact, going to jail was the best thing that had happened to Adolf Hitler, because when he came out of, when he was released from jail, what ended up happening, he actually became even more popular because he went to jail for something that other young people of his age could identify with. Someone who went to jail because he said that he wanted to make sure that Germany wouldn't have to pay war reparation fee, because he felt that Germany was being humiliated, so there was no reason for that to happen. So people in Germany could identify with Adolf Hitler at that time. Ironically, that's really pretty much what we observe here in the United States with Donald Trump running for the presidency of the United States. What did he do? He started talking about things that get a number of people to be able to identify with. Immigration. Now he started talking about Mexican being rapists and so on and so forth. Now you would expect someone who started off that way would be completely ignored, would be marginalized, but instead what ended up happening is the very fact that instead of being marginalized, Donald Trump became more popular. The same approach used by Adolf Hitler in Germany in 1929, 1930. So he started talking about the very thing that everybody else felt, that Germany was being humiliated by the League of Nations. Does that sound familiar to you? That how Donald Trump made his campaign against the United Nations? Now, for those of you who may not have remembered, during the time that Donald Trump, during the primaries, he was even calling out for the end of the United Nations. He made a lot of cases against the United Nations. He even went as far as saying that the United Nations was going against UN interests. So there is really a high degree. They both started really from very different background, because remember last time I mentioned to you, Donald Trump started with a silver spoon in his mouth. Adolf Hitler, on the other hand, started with in a family that was struggling. His mother wasn't working. His father was working enough to really kind of just make ends meet. In fact, when his father died, his mother had difficulty even collecting pension that was owed to the family. According to history, that it took really a lot of pushing and pulling to even get a paycheck to come to the family. So it was struggle for Hitler and family. In the meantime, Donald Trump was having a plushy life. Now that big divide starting to narrow as those two are getting older and older in life. Just like contrary to Donald Trump, who was fleeing, going in the armed forces, Adolf Hitler voluntarily actually joined the armed forces. So those two gentlemen were going in completely different direction until much later in life. Now, Adolf Hitler, being the leader of the Nazi Party, found himself really at odds, and really at big odds with the rest of Germany. Because despite the fact that a lot of people think of the Nazi Party now as being a party that was very popular in Germany, it wasn't so until much later on. In fact, even when Adolf Hitler was named the leader of the party, it was a very narrow, it had really very little influence in Germany. So it was kind of a small group that was trying to gain some kind of name recognition, because it was mostly fighting on the fringe for a small little group, because the political party didn't have really room for the Nazi. Now, because of the fact that now there was something that gave rise to Adolf Hitler, mainly meaning the fact that Germany had to pay war reparation fee, mainly because Adolf Hitler went to jail trying to overthrow a government. But when he came out, he makes that a very different topic, because as far as his speech was concerned, he was doing that because he cared so much about Germany. Does that sound familiar? He cared so much about Germany because he didn't want Germany to stay humiliated in the world stage. Exactly the same type of language that Donald Trump was using during the primaries. So United States was being humiliated by the whole world, according to Donald Trump. And that's the language that was used by Adolf Hitler to say that we cannot continue in that path, and that's the reason that he tried to overthrow the government. Now, he also had something else that people liked. He was a very charismatic man. Now, contrary to Donald Trump, who simply talked mostly trash, of course, also loved by the people who were rallying behind him. But nevertheless, the difference between those two men, Donald Trump doesn't really have any kind of mindset, any political mindset, any way of really framing a conversation, but his language match the people that follows him. Contrary to Donald Trump, Adolf Hitler was known as a very charismatic person. Not only that, he seemed to have had a strategy for Germany. So he wasn't just talking about what was going wrong in Germany. He wasn't just talking nonsense, but he also had a plan for Germany. Now, that doesn't excuse what's going to happen later, but it just to draw you the parallel between those two men as to how they started and where they at some point in their lives. So while they use the same approach to rally a group behind them, at some point in life they differ in some aspect as to how they approach that very aspect of their lives. So in a sense, they exploit humans' emotion. They exploit that. People weakness. That's what they relied on. They use the fear that Mexicans are sending rapists, blacks are criminals, and so on and so forth. They use people fear, they use people emotion, they use the worst approach to appeal to a group of people who are more too ready to go that route, that path. So both Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump are very good at exploiting the worst of mankind. Hatred. Their hatred for something, for someone. Adolf Hitler used hatred of the wealthy, the individual, the wealthy individual who happened to be at that time the Jews. So Adolf Hitler exploited that because a number of young people in Germany at that time, during Adolf Hitler time, they were struggling. There were no work. They were unemployed. They were scraping for food. So Adolf Hitler knew that when he brought that to the surface, all those things will be well received, because the people that he was talking to, those people were very familiar with what he was saying. Germany struggling financially, the German, especially the young one, struggling financially. Most of them were out of work. Most of their families were struggling. And then here comes that guy that telling them what's causing that. What was causing that predicament for those young people were those Jews that were having lavishing lifestyle, going to the movies, going to the theater, having dancing parties every week at their place. And yet here we are struggling. They are responsible for our problem. He was very charismatic. So what was happening at that time, despite the fact that the Nazi party didn't have much representation in the Reichstag and the Reichsrat, but something was happening that get the German political elite to be very scared. Adolf Hitler was happening to Germany. So they went to Hindenburg. Now, why Hindenburg? 84 years old? Why would they go to an 84-year-old man who they couldn't even, they didn't know how long that guy would live? And yet, this is the guy that they appealed to. Now, there was a reason they did that, is because it wasn't just a war strategist, but according to history, Paul von Hindenburg was a god, an icon in Germany. He was an icon. He was worshipped because of the fact that Germany knew him as someone who, when he strategized for war, you can almost rest assured his strategy would work. And that's how he became a god, because they trust that guy. If he said, we're going to attack on the left, we're going to attack on the right, you can rest assured his plan was well thought out. It's not something that he just throwing mud here, throwing mud there, and hoping at some point something will stick. He was a gentleman that would take his time talking to the people that he was going to put in charge of different groups, of different group of armed forces. And before he said, we're going to attack on the left, we're going to attack on the north, on the south, he planned it, and then sure enough, victory would come pretty quickly for Germany. So Paul von Hindenburg was recognized for being that type of person. But what that has to do with Adolf Hitler? Now remember, I just mentioned to you that they called on Paul to help them with World War I, and well, it didn't go too well, did it? Because they lost World War I. But they also recognized that had it not been for von Hindenburg, that Germany would have suffered a crushing defeat. Well, it did, but most of the soldiers survived. But had it not been for Hindenburg, who could recognize very quickly when he was losing the war, had it not been for any other general responsible for that war, then Germany would have not just been defeated, but he would have lost all the soldiers. But in the case of Hindenburg, very early on, he recognized defeat and he accepted defeat. So despite that defeat, they recognized this is the best person that they had to appeal to when Germany was in trouble. So in 1929, Germany was not in trouble, was not at war. So why did they have to call to Paul von Hindenburg, retired, 84 years old? Well, something happened. Adolf Hitler was gaining so much popularity. The young were rallying behind Adolf Hitler. In fact, history reported that no matter where Adolf Hitler went, the minute that he started talking, before you knew it, he didn't need any commercial, any advertising to say Adolf Hitler was going to be in such and such place, because he was very popular. He always had a crowd behind him because they went to listen to Adolf Hitler. You don't see a parallel here with Donald Trump. Remember how much he was boasting about? No matter where he went, he had people flocking to listen to Donald Trump talking. He talking about outside, so many people could not come in. It's because so many people went to hear Donald Trump. They went to hear what he had to say. Now, something very, very similar was happening in Germany. That Adolf Hitler was enjoying a very popular crowd of young people that really were hungry to hear. Besides, they had nothing else to do. They were unemployed. They were hungry for someone to tell them that there is hope. They were hungry for someone who can change that predicament for them. And Adolf Hitler was very good at doing that. He was very charismatic. Now, not that because he could offer them a solution. He didn't have a solution. He was just the leader of the Nazi party. He wasn't really in a position to do anything, to change anything. Remember, I mentioned that that party was a very marginalized party in the government. They only had 3 members of their party in the Reichstag. So they couldn't do much. But popularity, Adolf Hitler had that. So when they saw that, when the government saw that, they said, if we let that guy, because they saw a danger in the kind of conversation that Adolf Hitler was having with those crowds around him, because he wasn't just talking that the Jews were responsible for Germany's problem. He wasn't just talking about the Germany being humiliated by the League of Nations, but he was talking about a revolution where not only to get rid of this whole thing of the League of Nations telling Germany what to do, but he was talking about getting rid of those people who were depleting the country of its wealth, meaning the Jews. So his rhetoric were very, very scared, scary for the political elite at that time. Now, if you come back to here, to the United States, you would remember those were the kind of things that were happening during the time that Donald Trump were running for the public office during the primary. Very similar to what was going on in Germany. That he was saying all the right thing that his crowd wanted to hear. All the right thing. That treaty that the United States had with China, with the rest of the world, was bad for the country. In fact, those treaties were depleting the countries of job, of money, and so on. And guess what? Donald Trump was the person to change all that. That's the exact same message that Adolf Hitler was giving to the crowd that were following him everywhere he went. That Germany was being humiliated by the League of Nations. Today, Donald Trump talked about United Nations. Then there was the League of Nations. Similar thing, the same kind of speech. And the country was being, Germany that is, was being depleted of its wealth by those very few people, the wealthy, the Jews. Those were the people that were depleting the country of its money. What did Donald Trump tell you about all the wealthy individuals when he becomes president? At least that's what he said. When he became president, he was going to go after all those rich people and make them pay. Of course, that was part of the speech during the primaries. Today, it's a whole different story, of course, but that was the speech. So those two men, they sound very similar in terms of how they go about it. They exploit human emotion. They exploit human fear for their own selfish reason. Not that, did Adolf Hitler really want something good for Germany? Does Donald Trump really want something good for America? Well, we'll get to that point very shortly. But those two men used the same approach to get the crowd behind them. And crowds they did get. And the crowds kept growing, growing, and growing. And what actually started being even scarier in Germany at that time is the fact that just the same way it started here in the United States, you start having crowds of a certain group of people in that aspect. It was just the young that were following Adolf Hitler. And then as time went by, older people start following too. Now, a lot of people are under the impression that whenever we talk about Adolf Hitler, it's almost as if he put a gun on people's head to do things. That's what most people think of a dictator. That's what most people think of Adolf Hitler. Whenever they hear the word Adolf Hitler, that's why a lot of the Trump supporters say there is no comparison whatsoever. Why are we comparing Donald Trump with Adolf Hitler? Donald Trump didn't kill 6 million Jews. Adolf Hitler didn't kill 6 million Jews during the time that, at the point that we're talking now. In fact, as you can see up to this point that we're talking, Adolf Hitler was doing everything according to the way politics work. He was giving speech and rallying people. He became popular. There is nothing monstrous about that approach, except for the message, of course. The same thing we can say for Donald Trump. So when people think of Adolf Hitler as a monster, they think it's like he just get hold of power and then he start doing things. That's not the way it happened. Now, I just mentioned earlier that Adolf Hitler is gaining so much popularity that it starts scaring the political elite in Germany. So they did what they thought was necessary to put an end to Adolf Hitler, or at the very least to stop that caravan of going behind him and literally threatening the very existence of Germany. So they call on the only person that they believe could save Germany from Adolf Hitler. They call on Paul von Hindenburg. Don't go anywhere. We'll come back shortly to talk about how Paul is going to not only stop Adolf Hitler, but how interesting the play of politics was in Germany at that time, and why the United States couldn't use the same play in regards to Donald Trump. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back.
I'm telling you, Michael Jordan himself was right here in my McDonald's. I fixed him the very first McJordan special.
Right, Bill.
I did. I took a quarter-pound of pure beef, smoked bacon, cheese, and some of my favorite barbecue sauce, and I named it the McJordan Special.
Bill, the sandwich, definitely great.
Yeah, but you got the cooling with that story. But it's true.
How you doing, Bill?
Hi, Michael. Michael.
The McJordan Special for a limited time.
Whoa! That is some group of people, thousands. So nice, thank you very much. That's really nice, thank you. It's great to be at Trump Tower. It's great to be in a wonderful city, New York. And it's an honor to have everybody here. This is beyond anybody's expectations. There's been no crowd like this. We used to have victories, but we don't have them. When was the last time anybody saw us beating, let's say, China in a trade deal, they kill us. I beat China all the time.
Donald Trump has transformed America in ways no one could ever anticipate. One can only guess where the country will be at the end of his presidency. We have, however, captured the journey to the Oval Office in the book entitled Defiant for America. They said he didn't have the guts to run for public office. He proved them wrong. They said his presidential bid would not last a few weeks. He proved them wrong. They said he could not become the nominee. He proved them wrong. Get a copy of this book and follow Donald Trump in his journey to make America great again. Found at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere online. Get your own copy today. Don't go anywhere. The Fourth Branch program will return in just a moment. Join me here on the Fourth Branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday.
I didn't believe it. Again.
Ooh, baby, do you know what that's worth?
I want to believe it.
Ooh.
I'm not hearing the confidence. Okay, hold the name of your price tool. Power of options based on your budget. And
Ooh, make heaven a place on earth.
my angels.
Ooh, heaven is a place on earth.
In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. Hello again, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch Project. We are currently debating similarities between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. We left you talking about Paul von Hindenburg. Paul von Hindenburg, as mentioned, was a general in the German armed forces who was called in to help with World War I, went after being called from retirement and came back, and after the war went back to retirement, and now in 1932 was called again, this time not to help with the war but to help with the idea of crushing the rise of Adolf Hitler, because Adolf Hitler was gaining a lot in popularity, and the German elite believed that it was not good for the country. Now, there is really a similar reaction to what was happening right here in the United States in regards to Donald Trump, and ironically, the outcome is most likely gonna play out pretty much same as in Germany. So the question that I left with is, why would Germany, or at least the government there, call in an 84-year-old man to help them with someone who was just a soldier in the armed forces? Now granted, then he became the leader of the Nazi Party, but the Nazi Party was a small, marginalized party in the whole scheme of things. So why did they need Paul von Hindenburg to help? As mentioned before we went on break, Paul von Hindenburg was admired, was an icon in Germany at that time. Now, even after Germany lost World War I under his belt, they still considered what he did as the best strategy for the country. So the idea was, the only person who may be able to stop Adolf Hitler on his track was Paul von Hindenburg. Yes, he was old. Yes, he wasn't someone interested in politics, but there was nobody else in Germany who could match Adolf Hitler's popularity. So when someone sitting in their living room kind of think Adolf Hitler was a dictator, was a monster, thinking that's all there was to it, and thinking that he just got grab power and then start getting people to do his thing, or put a gun on everybody's head. That's not the way it happened. Adolf Hitler was very popular. Now, you can argue the reason behind it being bad. You can argue with the fact that, well, those people should have known better. Just like here, we had exactly the same thing that happened here to the United States. You can say that, well, how could American citizen really line up behind somebody such as Donald Trump? How could they? Now, you can have that kind of argument. So I want to make sure you understand that when we're talking about Adolf Hitler, because most of the people on Donald Trump camp who's trying to discard or to simply ignore the idea that there could not be any kind of comparison between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler, the argument they always bring is Adolf Hitler was a dictator. Adolf Hitler was a monster. Adolf Hitler, of course, became a monster. But it was not, it didn't start out that way. He was a very popular individual. So don't think when you're talking about what happened in Germany with Adolf Hitler, because that's always the argument that's brought forth, cannot happen here in the United States, because it started the way that everything started, with a group of people believing in someone, trusting someone, and putting their faith on someone, and gradually finding out that that person is using what that kind of trust they put on them, on that individual, and use that trust to do something really bad. And that's what Adolf Hitler did. We're not there yet, but that's really the gist of it. So I don't want people really, whenever I'm having a conversation with individuals, especially those who belong in Donald Trump camp, to think Adolf Hitler was bad, then we shouldn't really compare him with Donald Trump. Adolf Hitler became bad, but Adolf Hitler was very popular. He didn't have to put a gun on anybody's head. In fact, all those young people that followed Adolf Hitler, they did so voluntarily. In fact, they did so in defiance of their own government at that time. Because the same argument we were having during Donald Trump time, during the primaries, where everybody, every newspaper, everybody who has a logical, irrational mind was asking the very question, how could people who have a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of understanding, a little bit of logic, how could those people rally behind Donald Trump? Remember that? That's the exact same predicament that Germany was in. So it wasn't any Adolf Hitler going around rounding people up and putting gun in their head and tell them that you have to be part of the Nazi party. It wasn't that way. It didn't start out that way. Adolf Hitler started out as a very popular individual, people that other people look up to for solution. That's the way it started. So don't get me, don't get it wrong thinking, well, just because it happened in 1933, just because Adolf Hitler became a dictator, became a monster, then we cannot compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. We are exactly the same place with Donald Trump as Germany was with Adolf Hitler. A popular individual who said things that people like, who said things to rally crowds, but whatever they have in mind, nobody knows. In fact, we had a taste of that not too long ago with Donald Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin in Finland, where those two leaders met and nobody knows what they talked about. So don't tell me that it's impossible to compare Donald Trump with Adolf Hitler, because what Donald Trump is doing today is pretty similar to what Adolf Hitler was doing then. The predicament Donald Trump put the country today is the same predicament that Adolf Hitler put Germany then. So yes, there is every reason to compare Donald Trump with Adolf Hitler. There is every bit of reason. The situation is the same. The scenarios are the same. The predicament is the same. In fact, it's so strikingly similar that it would send chill to your spine to see that, can it, will it, is it possible that we're heading that way? Because the predicament are the same. Then in Germany, the political environment clearly tells the political elite that there is something wrong with that gentleman. His message was not actually standard. This message, yes, it resonated with a number of people, actually with a huge crowd, to the point that it was scary. Because you have all those young people with a lot of energy cheering Adolf Hitler. They didn't have a gun on their head. There was no gun pointed at their head. There was nobody rounding them up to go and listen to Adolf Hitler. They voluntarily went to every time Adolf Hitler stood somewhere to talk. Crowds around him to listen to what he had to say. So don't get it twisted, don't get it wrong, as if Adolf Hitler was a dictator from the onset, was a monster from the onset. It became that monster later on. But just like here in the United States, where you had Donald Trump going around from cities to city, from state to state, from counties to counties, where he had large crowd of people cheering him for the kind of thing he was saying during the primaries. And people in the know, political pundit, expert, strategists, all were scratching their head and asking what the hell was going on. Same predicament in Germany. Germany was scratching its head. The political elite, the expert, the strategists, all of them were just aghast. How could that person, Adolf Hitler, a simple corporal in the armed forces, who went to war, happened to come back alive, now become the leader of a marginalized party? And all of a sudden, he was that guy, now causing problem in Germany. And by problem, I don't mean trouble. I mean, it became so popular that now the elite had this in mind, that the only person that could counter Adolf Hitler was an 84-year-old man by the name of Paul von Hindenburg. And the reason they trusted Paul to help them out is because he was an icon, he was God for Germany. And despite the fact that Adolf Hitler became that popular, but Paul was not just popular. He was an icon, he was God, and he was the only one capable of stopping Adolf Hitler right on its track. So in 1932, during the election, that 84-year-old man won the election as the first president of Germany in a runoff. So, sigh of relief, Paul von Hindenburg won. He was the president of Germany. That should have put an end to everything, right? Because Paul won. No more Adolf Hitler. In fact, a number of things happened, because remember, Paul was the general who led Germany to World War I and got the soldier out of that predicament alive. Great strategist, someone that the country believes in, someone that they think could get them out of any predicament. So Paul was the chip that Germany bet on every time. So once again, now it wasn't war. It wasn't war because Paul was known for being a great general, for being a great strategist. But Paul wasn't a politician. So they breathed a sigh of relief that now that Paul became president of Germany, well, at least for the time being, they kind of feel that they saved Germany from the rise of Adolf Hitler, right? Did they? Well, Paul became president of Germany in 1932. Now, in all fairness, because he was called for the very reason that he was, somebody like Adolf Hitler should not have anything whatsoever to do with politics, right? Because the president was the one who makes all the calls, right? So, and Paul not only became president of Germany, but remember, he was a very shrewd general. So as a general, he wasn't just the president of Germany, and he wasn't just there and being a politician, although that most likely would help, but he was there as someone who knew how to strategize. He was someone who knew how to keep his enemy at bay, and he was someone who was very well aware of Adolf Hitler's ambition. So, in other words, with Paul von Hindenburg in power, that was the end for Adolf Hitler. But in politics, unfortunately, someone with such a high level of popularity, you cannot completely get rid of that person. Paul wasn't thinking about that, obviously, but two things happened that was going to change everything for Germany, that was going to change everything for the world. Number one, Paul wasn't in good health. 84-year-old, understandable, right? He wasn't in good health. So, as the president of Germany, while he was in a position to do whatever he so choose to do, he had to rely on someone. He had to, because if you're not in good health and you're running a country, which means you cannot attend to everything, not to he would spend most of his time with a doctor, most of his time in bed, most of his time resting, besides the guy was 84 years old. So that benefited Adolf Hitler in a sense, because while this whole thing was going on, Adolf Hitler was still just what he was, the leader of the Nazi Party. And the Nazi Party was still there was no majority of party in the Reichstag, but the Nazi was really on the fringe. So Adolf Hitler could not play the political hand and try to change things to his favor. That was not possible. But he didn't admit to be defeated either. Remember earlier we mentioned that Adolf Hitler was trying to overthrow the government in 1923 because he had this thing in mind that Germany was being humiliated by the world body called League of Nations. Well, it looks like it's in his blood. He hates to be defeated. In fact, just a side note that Adolf Hitler never did well in school, but in his autobiography, he seemed to want to explain the reason he didn't do well in school is because he was punishing his father, because the father always wanted him to become someone he didn't want to become. So in order to defy the father, so he was just slacking in school. Well, that's his explanation. Whether it's true or not, nobody would ever know. But the bottom line is, Adolf Hitler always wanted things to go his way. He wouldn't accept defeat. That's why when Germany was defeated in World War I and slapped a war reparation fee, according to history, Adolf Hitler wanted to get rid of the government that accepted that kind of humiliation and just run the government the way he saw fit. So again, here is Adolf Hitler again, this time fighting for political life. He was on his way to become president of Germany. He was on his way because he had a popularity never seen before. So get that straight. Adolf Hitler didn't start out as a dictator. So here is Adolf Hitler with the largest popularity that any political leader in Germany has ever enjoyed. And yet, he was defeated by Paul von Hindenburg, an 84-year-old man. The reason is because Paul preceded Adolf Hitler. Not only that, he was considered an icon, a god in Germany. So that was the only person that they knew could help avoid a catastrophe in Germany. The only person that could help Germany avoid Adolf Hitler. And they were right. They called on Paul. Once again, he answered the call, and once again, he helped Germany win. Although that time it was very temporary. Paul had suffered of very poor health. He suffered of very poor health. And Adolf Hitler, all the time that was happening, Adolf Hitler was always nurturing the idea that he could help Paul implement what he had in mind. So while we can argue that Adolf Hitler wasn't genuine, obviously, because he was trying everything possible so that he could become the next person to succeed Paul, because he couldn't kick Paul out of his chair, because that would be considered a coup. By the way, that was discussed. It was discussed in secrecy with the leaders of the Nazi Party. It's not that it wasn't discussed. It was discussed when Adolf Hitler lost in a runoff to Paul von Hindenburg. Now they think that they had the numbers, at least in terms of popular backup, popular support. The Nazi believe, yes, we may not have the majority in the Reichstag and Reichsrat. And remember, I mentioned earlier that Reichstag in Germany is comparable to Congress in the United States, and Reichsrat compared to the Senate in the United States. So in both bodies of the German government at that time, the Nazi Party, known under the acronym NSDAP, couldn't be even considered as a minority, because they had really very few members. So from a political standpoint, Adolf Hitler didn't really have any way of getting hold of power until after another election. He didn't have any such possibility, because the person that had he won the election against Paul, he would have become president of Germany. But with Paul now being president of Germany, 1932, end of 1932, so Adolf Hitler was in a pickle. He wasn't satisfied being leader of the Nazi Party for two reasons. One, it didn't mean much, because he had no way of tilting the political balance, because there were not enough members of the party in Reichsrat or Reichstag. And Adolf Hitler was looking at that predicament and think, I have all those people behind me, and I'm worth absolutely nothing. Because yes, I have popular support, but that doesn't mean anything if I cannot get the government to do things that I would like to be done. So, in secrecy, the Nazi leaders, if you like, the one that were there before Adolf Hitler became the leader of NSDAP, those leaders, in several meetings, they came to the conclusion that the only way the Nazi Party could play a major role in Germany was to overthrow the new government, meaning Paul von Hindenburg. Now, you remember in 1923, Adolf Hitler tried exactly that. In 1923, he tried to overthrow the government. He failed. He went to jail. But in 1923, Adolf Hitler didn't have that kind of popularity. He just started out. He just came out of the armed forces, just came out of World War I, and it's someone that just dabbled into politics. He wasn't that popular. Yes, he started to get other young people who felt the same way start warming up to the idea, but he didn't have a group that could support him that much. Now, in 1932, after he lost the election to Paul von Hindenburg, and notice what I said, election. So Adolf Hitler, contrary to what all the Trump supporters keep thinking or keep saying, that Adolf Hitler was a dictator, and then that means it could not, we cannot compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. Well, Adolf Hitler went through the process just like Donald Trump did. He went through election just like Adolf Hitler did. But contrary to Donald Trump, who won the election, Adolf Hitler lost. Adolf Hitler lost the election. Now we can drop a few zingers in. There was no Russia to help. It was a clean election. There was no internet to help spreading false news, to help spreading bad news about Paul von Hindenburg. I can imagine today, I can imagine the predicament today Paul would be in, where his God-like image would be smeared to a point that people would think, well, maybe he's not worth it afterwards. You can imagine that environment today, how Adolf Hitler would take advantage of a smearing machine to say how bad Paul von Hindenburg was. That wasn't available to Adolf Hitler. Thank God, for a moment, of course. So, the Nazi leaders, after a few meetings, in fact, Adolf Hitler was at some point very angry because there were a few meetings that took place without him. Remember, in 1921, he was appointed the leader of the German Workers' Party, which later on will become the Nazi Party. Remember, in 1921. Now, such that it became so popular that now they had to call on an 84-year-old man to counter him, the only person who could defeat him. So he had increased in popularity in Germany. So the very idea of the Nazi leaders to have meeting without Adolf Hitler was not looked upon well in the eyes of Adolf Hitler. Nevertheless, they had a few meetings and they came to the conclusion that now the German Nazi Party had enough support, enough popular support, that if they tried a coup on the government, that time it will succeed because they have the people to back them up. They have the people to support them. And on top of that, they rely on a very popular leader, Adolf Hitler, to smooth things out. So after they discussed it a few times, and all the leaders raised their hand, yeah, that's the way to go. Now Adolf Hitler was made aware of a meeting that he was asked to attend. in secrecy, again, Adolf Hitler went into the meeting at the last minute. I say that the last minute is because what the leaders of the Nazi Party did when they're inviting Adolf Hitler was actually shrewd, but we would never know whether Adolf Hitler's decision later on had anything to do with that, because nobody ever talked about that aspect of the conversation. The leaders of the Nazi Party gathered in secrecy in a room where, again, they all came to the conclusion that, okay, we've been talking about that, we've been arguing about all the pros and the cons, we all agreed that the way to go is a coup, a political coup to overthrow the current president of Germany. So I guess I would say the main leader decided that was the way to go. So everybody agree, everybody in the room raise their hand, yeah, there is no nay, everybody goes along, this is the way we're going. And then they send someone to look for the leader of the party, Adolf Hitler, who relate to Hitler that we're having a meeting, and you, as the leader of the party, you are needed to, I guess, for his blessing. But when message was sent to Hitler to attend the party, the messenger was instructed not to provide any detail, to simply say he didn't know what it was about, except that the party, the leader of the party was having a meeting and his presence was required. Mr. Hitler obliged and went there, and when he got there, he found already gathered in the room all the leaders of the Nazi Party were there. I would call the gentleman, the spokesperson, stood up, and his name escaped me, but he was the one who was leading the Nazi Party prior to Hitler appearance in the political scene, or to before Hitler became the leader of the Nazi Party. So Hitler walked in the room, and the minute he walked in the room, so the leader came and greeted him and told him that in unanimously, we have decided that we have to overthrow the current government so that the Nazi Party can become the ruling party in Germany. According to history, Hitler didn't think about it. Hitler didn't ponder about it. Hitler didn't consider it. He immediately answered, no, we're not going that route. Now, for those of you who continue to think and insisted that Adolf Hitler was just a dictator, was a monster, and thinking that mean he grabbed power in Germany. Now listen to how history reported Adolf Hitler. other members of the Nazi Party came to the conclusion that the way forward is to overthrow the government. Hitler said no. And again, I want you to understand that Hitler so much didn't want to go that route. According to history, he didn't have to think. He didn't think about it. Right after he was told what the meeting was about, he immediately answered, no, we're not going to overthrow any government. Now, you can have an argument and say, he did that before. Yes, he did in 1923. In 1923, he did try to overthrow the government. He had matured. And he had a reason to want to overthrow the government. One, he's the party leader. And two, he has a popularity that last time he did that, he went to jail. But it's almost assured that if he went along with that, there would be no jail, because he would have succeeded that time, because he had a popularity never seen before. So why did he say no? It's because Adolf Hitler never explained why he didn't want to go that route, but I would surmise that he wanted to become a legitimate ruler of the nation. So all this idea about Adolf Hitler, a monster, a dictator, yes, he will become that later. But everything started out just like any democracy. He ran, lost, he accepted his loss. Even when presented with the opportunity to actually overthrow the government in power, which he would have succeeded by any analysis, he had enough support, and mainly the support of the young, the support of the people, and yet he said no. Now, when he said no, that wasn't the end of the story, because the leaders say we have continued to explain, because they probably imagined that Adolf Hitler would go along and the story would end there, and everybody would just start strategizing how to go about doing that, or planning how to go about doing that. Because remember, they are going against the greatest war strategist, who is now sitting on the throne as president of Germany. So they couldn't just go at it any which way and hoping to win. So they wanted Hitler's blessing before they start putting a plan in motion. And they got a stern no. So that didn't end the story there. A few meetings later, tried to convince Hitler that there is no other way. We have the popularity, but we don't have the political might, the political muscle. We don't have that. But they didn't know, or maybe Hitler never explained to them what he had in mind, or they didn't know what Hitler had in mind. Or maybe the very fact that they tried to overthrow the government could have been the reason that Hitler, maybe they triggered something in Hitler's mind. Whatever the case is, Hitler didn't overthrow the government. Hitler actually went against the idea. So get that right. He wasn't a dictator because he overthrew a government. He wasn't a monster because he grabbed power. He was appointed the leader of the Nazi Germany party. He became very popular. He got the support of most German, not a gun pointed at anybody's head. The German support that Adolf Hitler had was genuine because Adolf Hitler was charismatic. He knew how to communicate with people. He knew how to push the right button. He knew what to say. He knew how to exploit their weakness. Here, Donald Trump knew how to create villains. Donald Trump created villains and offered himself as a hero. That's really the state of affairs. If you have a villain, you need a hero to fight the villain. So Donald Trump, along the way, create villain. In fact, people he considered good, great. I can give you a number of examples. Started with his campaign manager, great guy. Started with Flynn, Mike Flynn, great guy. They're doing bad thing to him until he makes them a villain, because that's the way it started with Donald Trump. It started great guy, great girl, great this, great that, and when he no longer wants you, needs you, then all of a sudden you become a villain. The irony, as you'll find out, is while the approach by Adolf Hitler was a tad different from Donald Trump, because Adolf Hitler didn't per se create villain, he pointed to villain. The German support, the German reception about the fact that there were so many villains in Germany that the country needed to get rid of. So they both used the approach that's appealing to their respective base. So Adolf Hitler pointed to villains that the country needed to get rid of. Donald Trump creates villains he needs to fight the country to save the country from. Like now, what's going on, Michael Cohen, who was his fixer, his right-hand man for the longest, now is creating a villain out of Michael Cohen because the country needs saving from Michael Cohen. Now, back to Adolf Hitler. A few meetings later, that the Nazi leaders tried to convince Adolf Hitler that a coup ought to happen in order for the party to become the ruling party of Germany, and every single instance they brought that, Adolf Hitler said categorically, no, we're not going to overthrow the government. Now, if you think about it clearly, that was a noble gentleman. he accepted having been defeated, and when presented with another option, which he would have succeeded, he ran away from it. He said, no, we're not going that route. Yes, I did that before. I was young, I was immature, I didn't know what I was doing, but not this time. We have to become the running party legitimately. So you cannot come and use the argument that Adolf Hitler was a dictator, so there is no reason or there is no way to compare it to Donald Trump. In fact, there is every single reason to compare Adolf Hitler to Donald Trump. But what did happen? Interestingly, once again, Adolf Hitler won and had things done his way, because when the conversation wouldn't end, the conversation about throwing the government, overthrowing rather the government, when the conversation wouldn't end, Adolf Hitler threw a wrench that the Nazi leaders had to back down. He mentioned that if they continue to ask to overthrow the government, he would no longer be the leader of the party. Now think about that for a moment. He's a guy who is presented that monster that we're talking about, that dictator that we're talking about, that everybody think that we shouldn't compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. We should compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler because there are a lot of similarities that we are discussing now. Now, he's a guy who is in a position, who is offered the opportunity to get hold of power, to grab power. He ran to become the president of the Germany. He ran, he lost. Now, he had a popularity never ever seen before in Germany, and yet he refused to go the route of overthrowing the government. He could have. Not only he said, no, I'm not going to do that, but he also threatened to leave the Nazi party if they continue that route. If they continue to discuss that, he would no longer be part of the party. And of course, the Nazi leaders knew without Adolf Hitler, the party cannot enjoy that kind of popularity, because it's not the party so much that you have all those people rallying behind. It's Adolf Hitler, because he was a very charismatic person and he had a message that they actually liked. So it wasn't same here. It's not, when you think about it, Donald Trump, if Donald Trump were to leave the Republican Party and become whatever party, let's just call it the Trump Party, all those people that currently be supporting Donald Trump, that's currently going and still supporting him, would still follow him there, because they're not supporting the Republican Party. They're supporting an idea. They're supporting a person, an individual. Yes, there is every reason to compare Donald Trump with Adolf Hitler. Now, listen to this. Anybody in their right mind, now that's just a parenthesis, because think about that. You have the President of the United States, go and actually had a meeting with the head of Russia, the president of Russia, and the country is completely unaware of what they talked about. Now, you think about what just happened for a moment. Anybody who has a brain that works, any individual who has a working brain would tell you that this is not good. Not good for any country, any leader of a country to do that. And yet, the President of the United States did that, and guess what happened? All the people who voted for him, all the people who supported him, according to survey, according to poll, Donald Trump still enjoy the same type of support. What does that tell you? That none of those people can think for themselves, none of those people can think for the well-being of the country, and to them it doesn't matter what Donald Trump does, including selling the sovereignty, trashing the sovereignty of the country is okay to them. So we have the same predicament. So when someone come and tell me not to think of it, unless you, even if you were to be blind, even if you were to be deaf, you cannot possibly believe that it is good for the United States. And yet, that's where we at. It's not something that you take, oh, Democrats, those damn liberals are talking about it. Now, the only other network, and I heard and I listened to every single host in that network, that's Fox. That's actually helping spreading this notion that what Trump is doing is okay, helping destroying the very basis, the very foundation of the nation. How blind can someone be? Well, I know how blind can anyone be. The country has gone through that before. And I repeat that every chance that I got. Currently, unequivocally, everybody who supports Donald Trump is on the wrong side of history. Everybody, no if and but about it, no politics involved. They all on the wrong side of history. Why do I say that? There was a time that was also the case right here in the United States. We had a civil war in the United States. It's because there were also millions of people who decided to be and stay on the wrong side of history. So this is not a surprise that's the case. What is surprising is to see that there are people who are holding a bachelor degree, some people holding a master degree, and yet those people are as ignorant as someone who never stepped foot in school. And that's not good. Now, before you throw tantrum, as a lot of Trump supporters have, that they don't care what other people say, I know you don't, because the civil war happened because there were a lot of people exactly in that predicament that say they couldn't care less what the other side think. We were there before. You couldn't care less because obviously that's the way you are. That's the kind of people you are. You can't care less because you okay to follow someone who is doing everything humanly possible to destroy the very country your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors come to for opportunities. I know you couldn't care less, because if you did, today Donald Trump approval rating would have been 0. I know you couldn't care less because you just as bad in terms of your thinking, if indeed you can think as Donald Trump is, because Donald Trump is doing those things for his own personal gain. Now you may think Donald Trump is doing something for you. If you're looking back, he's doing a lot of things that actually, not only, when I say worse for the country, in every sense of the word. The $1.5 billion tax cut, $1.3 billion out of that goes to corporation. Remember, you were going to get some of that? They were going to hire people left and right. They were going to really bring money back to the country. Companies were going to flock back into the United States. Remember that? This whole thing being drum beat that Donald Trump is going to make that happen? When was the last time he even mentioned that? It's not happening. In fact, if you've been following the news, the very company that he was propping, those companies are moving job overseas. The latest one we heard from was the Harley Davidson. So we know that Donald Trump is acting the way he's acting because it benefits him personally. But what is sad about the situation is the fact the people who are supporting him are doing it so blindly, they don't realize that they're doing things that actually detrimental to their own benefit, their own interest. He's a good example. The EPA got rid of a lot of safeguard that prevents company from dumping chemical in the rivers where we take water to drink. Now they don't have that problem. Who do you think is going to pay the price? Your children, your grandchildren? Two, three generations? They're going to all suffer of disease that nobody would know or understand where that come from. Because it's in the water that they're drinking, it's in the air they're breathing, but for whatever reason, you're so happy that now Donald Trump is getting rid of those regulations. Now, which smart individual would actually support a government that's doing things detrimental to their wealth, to their health? Which smart person would do that? Don't raise your hand, because I know you're already on that side of the story, of the history. If you're a Donald Trump supporter, I already know you are on the wrong side of history. What still difficult to understand is, what the hell are you thinking? Where is the brain that God gives you? And I always make the point, the only thing which differentiates us human beings from the other animal species is the brain that can help us make good decisions. But if you're making decisions that end up being bad for you, bad for your kids, bad for the next generation, then you're not any different than any of those other animals. Adolf Hitler said no to overthrowing the government because he wanted to become a legitimate individual who ran Germany. So after trying several times to get him to overthrow the government, he threatened to leave. Donald Trump did that at some point, didn't he? During the primary, when the Republican Party were talking about not accepting him as the nominee of the party, he actually threatened to go elsewhere. Adolf Hitler threatened to leave the Nazi party if those Nazi leaders continue to talk about overthrowing the government. So Adolf Hitler is not the person that you're thinking that all of a sudden become a dictator or a monster and start killing Jews. Then we cannot compare him to Donald Trump. We already talked about the aspect of the beginning of his life. Now we're talking about Adolf Hitler at a point where he could have done something wrong. He could have overthrown the government. He chose not to. Stay with me. I'll be right back.
Wayfair, you've got just what I need. Everything from my home, you got it for me. I never see selection quite like this. Every color and size in my mind. They got every single thing on my list. And with 70% off, who knows what I'll find. Wayfair, you've got just what I need. Everything from my home, you got it for me. Wayfair, and the shipping was free. Now my home's the home I want.
From all of us at Wayfair, find what you need today.
Ignorance, they say, is the biggest threat to any democracy. Indeed, it is. Plato, a Greek philosopher born in 427 BC, said that ignorance is the root and stem of all evil. Today, members in the Republican Party wear ignorance as a badge of honor, while the rest of the country watch powerless the destruction of a country which was once the envy of the world. The media is the enemy of the country, said Donald Trump. The Democrat legislators are obstructionists for not going along with everything the president wants. The Department of Justice is biased for investigating corruption in the Trump administration. This is the United States of America. Any question? One answer is located on the People Branch website, link of which is provided below.
boogum, boogum now, baby, you're casting your spell on me. I say boogum, 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 boogum now, baby, you're casting your spell on me. My baby's casting spells on me.
Join me here on the 4th branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday.
After reading several books based on presidents and on Obama specifically, I found that they're typically partisan. The Obama legacy targets the heart of the issue by giving credit to the president where it's due, but definitely coming down hard on Obama on his bigger failures, like his handling of the Syrian crisis.
If you are in college, going to college, you are an educator, a faculty member, or someone with interest in government or politics, The Obama Legacy is definitely a book to read.
My professor recommended The Obama Legacy.
A friend actually recommended The Obama Legacy.
I would highly recommend this book for anyone, whether for academic use or leisure reading.
I would recommend this book to anyone out there searching for an impartial and unbiased look into Barack Obama's tenure as president.
I would definitely recommend this book as a good read for both liberals and conservatives.
Mom, Dad, hi. I had a very minor fender bender tonight in an unreasonably narrow fast food drive-thru lane. But what a powerful life lesson. And don't worry, I have everything handled. I already spoke to our Allstate agent, and I know that we have accident forgiveness, which is so smart on your guys' part. Like the fact that they'll just forgive you.
4 weeks without the car.
Okay, yep, good night.
With accident forgiveness, your rates won't go up just because of an accident.
Well, thank you for watching. We will come back at 6:30 p.m. to continue the conversation on the similarities between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. This is the Fourth Branch Project, the first and only program which is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a dedication for a more perfect union. This program is actually for the purpose of achieving a more perfect union. And we set out to do that by attempting to remove the biggest obstacles which prevent that from happening, which is ignorance. Ignorance is the biggest threat to democracy, and ignorance can impair the security of a whole country. JFK said that the ignorance of one voter impairs the security of us all. So ignorance is not personal. Ignorance is not private. It is a very heavy burden on society, on families. So our goal, our objective is to get rid of it. And one of the topic, which is the one we're discussing today, is debating the similarities between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. Our objective, our goal, is to educate you so that you get a sense of how things evolve from point A to point B, so that we do not have to relive what the past left as a lesson for us. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you can visit us back at 6:30 p.m. this afternoon when we continue the discussion on debating the similarities between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler.